Thank you, Antoinette, for the briefing. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to today's training, the Pearson Edexcel International GCSE Pakistan Studies, getting you ready to teach Module 2. I know some of you will have been here for the call, the meeting on Tuesday, where we were looking at Module 1, which provided us with an overview of the course. Today's module, we're going to be looking in more detail at the assessment model for this qualification and the different types of questions and preparing students for the exam, the questions that appear in the exam. For those of you who weren't on the previous course, my name is Andy Child, and I have worked for Pearson for over 15 years as a senior examiner. I am the chief examiner for the UK GCSE, and I was also involved in the writing for the International GCSE Geography. And I've also delivered training for this particular qualification for a number of years now, and I'm looking forward to today's session. So it's going to be 2 hours, and I will be building a 10-minute comfort break midway through. As Antoinette said, we've disabled the microphones and the Q&A, but if you have any questions during the course of this morning's session, please can you put that into the meeting chat. I will then be having a look at the meeting chat and answering any questions at the mid-session break. Also, we will hopefully be finishing a few minutes early, which will give me a chance to finish going through anything that's come up in the chat at the end of the session, and I will stay on the call until everybody's left. So if you wanted to come on mic at the end of the session, that's absolutely fine. Just make a note in the chat and we will get that arranged at the end of today's session. Okay, now throughout the session, I will be referring to various documents which are in your delegate pack. So in your delegate pack, you've got a copy of the specification for this course. You've also hopefully got various other resources, including some exemplar materials, a copy of the editable scheme of learning, and so on. All of these materials are available on the website, and I went through this in the previous course, and if we've got time today, I will draw your attention to where these can be found online. So, the agenda for today's session. So, primarily, we're looking at examination papers and assessment objectives. We're going to be looking at paper 1, the question types and the mark schemes for paper 1. And you're going to have a chance to actually have a look at some actual candidate responses and marking those. Also, we're going to then look at paper 2, so the aims and objectives and assessment objectives for paper 2, the question types and mark schemes on paper 2, and a similar activity where we will be looking at candidate responses for different abilities on paper 2. I think one of the questions that came up in the previous session was about, for the most able candidates, how do they actually access full marks? So on the 16 mark questions, how do they actually get to the top end of the mark scheme? But also, equally important, for the weaker candidates, how can they be supported in actually writing something? Often we see them just leaving it blank because they don't know where to start writing on one of these essay questions. But it's just to make sure that even those candidates at the other end of the scale, they can actually write something and get some marks on all types of questions. And then at the end of the session, I will just run through the support from Pearson Edexcel, because I'm aware some of us today will be teaching it and have joined this just for a bit of a refresher training, whereas some colleagues on the call today won't be teaching it or will or planning to teach it in the future. And also, I know we do have some people who are at a school or a college that does do this qualification, but they may have joined it and they haven't themselves taught it in the past. So hopefully, for all of us, it's going to be useful in getting a better understanding, really. So in terms of this understanding, it's important that you understand what assessment objectives are and the weightings for this qualification, the different types of questions that come up, because I think one of the good things about this qualification and the exams is that there is a very clear structure for exam papers, and this is a structure that is followed every year. Understanding the mark schemes. Obviously, these are written for the examiners when they are marking in the summer, but also these are often used by teachers and students in helping develop their skills, knowledge, and understanding. So we're going to be having a chance to look at some mark schemes and using them to mark candidate responses. And then finally, as I said earlier, learning about the different types of support offered by Pearson for this qualification. Okay, so just briefly before we get into it, welcome to Pearson Edexcel. Apologies if you were on the call on Tuesday because I've already gone through this and you'll have heard this, but for the people and the delegates who weren't on Tuesday's meeting, Pearson is one of the world's leading learning companies, and it's the UK's largest awarding organisation, and therefore they are best placed to provide qualifications aligned to the British educational system. This is something that they have been doing for over 150 years, and today they partner with schools, universities, and employers worldwide, offering world-class, globally recognised qualifications to over 3.5 million students a year. So it is an internationally recognised course, and they partner over 6,500 schools, colleges, and employers globally. During the course of the year, this isn't just in the summer, they mark over 10 million exam scripts and operate in 70 countries worldwide. So in terms of the actual course itself and the assessment features of International GCSE Pakistan Studies, there are two parts to the qualification. So two parts, two papers. The first one is the history and culture of Pakistan. So this is very much history orientated, and the content is divided into three sections, of which section 1 has one compulsory topic. So the whole of section 1 needs to be covered and it could be assessed in the exam. And then section 2 has 3 topics, of which one has to be covered and answered in the exam. And section 3 has 2 topics, of which one has to be covered and answered in the exam. So section 1 is all compulsory. In section 2 and section 3, there is optionality. There is no need to cover all of the topics. On paper 2, this is essentially the geography of Pakistan. It is called the Landscape, People and Economy of Pakistan. So this is human and physical geography. And just like paper 1, the content is divided into 3 sections. Students study all 3 sections, and at the end of the course, there is 2 written exams, one for paper 1, one for paper 2. And in both papers, there are a range of different types of questions: multiple choice, short open response questions, extended open response questions, and also in paper 2, there are data response questions. And we will be looking at all of these during the course of today's session. It's worth mentioning as well that all 3 sections in paper 2 are compulsory. So each section, parts of each section will be assessed in each series. So it's only on paper 1 where there is some optionality. So I mentioned previously about assessment objectives. Now, this is in the specification, and this is the weighting of different types of questions which will be appearing in the assessment. So assessment objective, or AO1, is demonstrating knowledge and understanding of key information, ideas, concepts, and themes. So this is approximately 24%. So about a quarter of the entire exam will be targeting AO1. And generally, these are the more straightforward questions, which are just requiring some recall or some basic description, facts and figures, etc. Slightly more advanced than that is AO2. So AO2 is analyze and explain key information, ideas, concepts, and themes. And this is roughly 44% of what candidates are going to be assessed on in their exams. So this is more than just recalling information. This is actually doing something with it, giving reasons why something has happened, analyzing different ideas, etc. And then AO3, this is the application of knowledge and understanding and skills to assess, evaluate, and interpret key questions and issues and make substantiated judgments. So this is about 32% of the GCSE, about a third. And this appears not just as a standalone question. This AO will work alongside the other AOs in some questions. For example, the 16-mark question, part of that is AO3, which will require candidates to make judgments. But obviously, there are elements of the other AOs in there as well. So across the two papers, it is evenly split. So you can see on paper 1 and paper 2, about 12% of the paper, 12% of the entire award is in paper 1, AO1, and so on. So in terms of weightings, the assessment objectives are evenly split across the two papers. Okay, so let's have a closer look at paper 1 now, history and culture. So this shows the breakdown of questions which appear on paper 1. So in each section, there will be multiple choice questions. So the multiple choice will have the command word identify. This will be linked to AO1, which is basic recall, and this will always be worth 1 mark. The second type of question will have will require candidates to give 2 examples of something, but the command word there will be state, and it won't require too much writing. Often they could get 2 marks writing just 2 words. There will be space for a couple of sentences, but there will not be much requirement for lots of writing here. This will also be targeting AO1. Then we've got the causation question, and this will have the command word explain, which is more than just merely describing something, but it's a requirement to start actually giving some explanation, giving reasons why something has happened or why something has had a certain effect. And this is going to be worth 6 marks, and there's a split between AO1 and AO2. So in other words, a candidate who, maybe a weak candidate who would find it hard to actually get into some explanation, they could still pick up the AO1 marks. Alternatively, a good explanation could have a combination of AO1 and AO2, but if they haven't got that breadth of ideas, so there's only maybe one reason that has been explained, they won't get the full marks. And then the fourth type of question is the question that requires a judgment relating to one of the following. So it will have, to what extent do you agree? And then it will have a statement about the relative importance, the effects or the significance about something. So the way this question is set out, we'll have the statement, and then they'll have the command word discuss, and it will say discuss how far you agree with this statement. And then there will be two bullet points, which will hopefully prompt candidates who are struggling to think of what to write, give them some ideas what they might would like to include in their answer. Now, this question is worth 16 marks, and there's an even split between AO2 and AO3 there. So remember, AO3, this is the assessment objective linked to coming up with a judgment, a substantiated judgment. Okay, so this is in your delegate pack as well, this example on page 3. So in terms of question types, multiple choice questions. An example could be identify the British politician sent to India in 1942 to win support for the British war effort, 1 mark. And there you can see we've got 4 possible answers, and the candidate will just need to select which one is correct. Now, these multiple choice questions will always have 1 correct answer and 3 distractors, incorrect answers, and it'll always be worth 1 mark. And the command word is identify, because the candidate is required to look at the possible options and pick out, identify the correct answer. The second type of question is the state 2 question. So, for example, state 2 princely states where partition brought problems in 1947, 2 marks. So again, this is targeting AO1, it's basic recall of information, and candidates won't need to write very much here. So I think in your delegate pack it had some possible answers. We had Jammu, Kashmir, Hyderabad, and allowing Bengal as well. So some possible answers there, none of them requiring too much writing. Part C questions. So this is the causation question. This appears on the next page of the delegate booklet. And this question here, explain why British military actions led to the War of Independence in 1857. Okay, I just would like to pause things here and ask you just to find in your delegate booklet, page 4, activity 1. So I'll just give you a minute or two just to dig out. It's activity 1 in your delegate booklet. If you're struggling to find the delegate booklet, can you pop a note in the chat, and then Antoinette can help you with that. Okay, I can't see any comments in the chat, so I presume that everybody has been able to find that delegate booklet. So I will just go through what I would like you to do for activity 1. So also in your delegate pack, you have got some exemplar responses. So this document is called International GCSE Pakistan Studies, Exemplars with Examiner Countries, Paper 1. Okay, so if you have a look at question 3C, so on 3C, it's page 16. I'll just scroll down in case you haven't got sight of this document. There we go. So question 3C. So this is the same question we just mentioned a moment ago on the slide. So on page 16 of the exemplar booklet, we've got a response. Well, we've got the mark scheme on page 16, and then we've got response A, and then we've got response B. Okay, 2 contrasting responses. So remember, this is a 6-mark question. The mark scheme will always show the breakdown of the AOs. So you can see in the mark scheme, it's AO1, 3 marks, and AO2, 3 marks. Important to remember, it says the indicative content below is not prescriptive, and candidates are not required to include all the material indicated as relevant. Other relevant material not suggested below must also be credited. So it's not a definitive list of things that candidates must include to get full marks. It's basically the most common responses that examiners could expect to see, but there'll be other stuff as well that is absolutely fine and will get credit. And obviously there'll be stuff in here that won't get mentioned by candidates who can also score full marks when talking about something else. So I will just give you 5 minutes just to have a look through the 2 exemplar responses. So we've got a response, and then we've got some examiner comments underneath. So the first one, this was given 3 marks. And then exemplar B, that was actually given 6 marks. So what I'd like you to do is just read through those two responses, have a look at the examiner comments, and then just think about which one is better and why. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes to have a look through those, and do put a message in the chat if you've got any questions about either of these 2 and how they were marked. Thank you. If you haven't got the exemplar pack available, I will just put exemplar response A up for a couple of minutes, and then I will move on to exemplar response B. Okay, hopefully that's given you a chance to read through exemplar A. So here is B. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a chance to have a look at them both. So just before we have a close look at the examiner comments, I just want to draw your attention to the level descriptors in the mark scheme. So if I just bring up these are in your delegate booklet. I'll just bring this up. Okay, so here's your delegate booklet, and on, I think it is page 4, you have got a copy of the levels mark scheme. So you can see on the screen now, this is the levels mark scheme for every single explained question that is worth 6 marks. So it is almost like a generic mark scheme. So regardless of the indicative content that's detailed in the mark scheme, the examiner will be asking themselves to begin with, which level does the answer fall into? So level 1, this is quite basic AO1 and AO2. So in terms of AO1, there'll only be a limited understanding of concepts. Some of the information might be actually inaccurate or irrelevant. So maybe 1 or 2 basic ideas. Demonstrates unsustained links to the focus, not developed. So they're going to be very basic, almost standalone-ish comments. Level 2 does demonstrate some partial understanding. So it's gone beyond just coming up with a basic idea. There is an attempt at some explanation, although it is going to be quite basic. There might be some links to the focus of the question, maybe some partial development, but it is certainly lacking the depth you would expect for level 3. And then level 3, this is the thorough understanding of concepts, accurate and relevant, and they've developed their links to the focus. So this is where you've got that more detailed reasoning, that more depth to the explanation. So just going back to the exemplars, the first one, we felt this just got into level 2. So I'm not going to read through the whole response. I'm sure you've had a chance to read this, but this response demonstrates some understanding of the concept of causation, but there was insufficient focus on the precise nature of the question. The question did not ask about the general causes of the war, but more specifically limited the context to military actions. In the response, the candidate has written what he or she knows about the causes of the war and has touched upon military causes. The response was marked at the bottom of level 2. So there is some valid ideas here. It is a bit kind of off the question at times. There is some partial explanation, but it's not been particularly well developed. But that partial explanation is enough to get it into level 2. The second one, this was awarded 4 marks. A good response, demonstrating a thorough understanding of the concept of causation, able to match the explanation closely with the focus of the question. So in other words, this candidate is directly answering the question rather than just producing a bit of a vague response, which is what the first candidate was doing. 3 reasons are given, all which relate to military matters. 2 of those have developed explanations of why they led to war. The response was marked at the top of level 3. So sometimes people say, well, how many reasons do you need to come up with? Now, it deliberately doesn't say in the question, explain 2 reasons why, or explain 3 reasons why. It will not say that. And this is because you could get full marks by taking different routes. So for example, you could do 2 really good, well-developed reasons and get full marks. Alternatively, you could do 3 or 4, and what you're losing in the depth, you might be gaining in the breadth, the range of ideas. But certainly I would be saying, folk train encouraged 2 or 3 well-developed reasons in terms of trying to access level 3. And remember, it is worth 6 marks. So thinking about how long a candidate spends on answering this question, spending 20 minutes writing a brilliant answer might get them 6 marks, but ultimately they might run out of time on some of the higher tariff questions later on in the paper. Okay, we'll just bring us back to our presentation. So that was the 6-mark question. We're now going to have a look at the 16-mark question, which also uses a levels mark scheme, but it's different to the one used for the explain questions. So looking at this question here, reforming agriculture was Ayub Khan's greatest success. Discuss how far you agree with this statement. You may use the following in your answer: the decade of development, the 1962 Constitution. You must also use information of your own. So before we have a look at a couple of examples of these, it's important to remember here that, well, number 1, discuss how far you agree. So there does need to be some element of judgments, their own opinion. So this is needed in this type of question. Secondly, we've got some bullet points here, which are there to prompt students. They don't have to do both of these. They don't even have to do one of those. But certainly for some students, this will be really useful in helping them get started in answering the question. The other thing to look at is it does say you must use information of your own. So if a candidate did a really good answer just looking at what was indicated by those bullet points, they wouldn't get full marks. So it is a 16-mark question, but the mark scheme is designed so candidates of all abilities from grade 1 to grade 9 can get some marks on this type of question. Okay, so what we're going to do now is have a look at activity 2 in your delegate booklet, and I will just attempt to bring that up on screen now. Oh. There we go. Okay, so for activity 2, it does relate to the question that we just had on screen. So what I'd like you to do is study the indicative and level-based mark scheme on page 30 and pages 4 and 5 of the examiner's report for paper 1. And then, so this has got the mark scheme for this question. And then have a look at exemplar responses A and B on pages 31 to 33 in the examiner's report. When it says examiner's report, that means the booklet with the exemplar materials in. Try and do that without reading the examiner's comments. Okay, I know you'd be tempted to have a look to see how many marks they were given, but have a look at response A first. And when you're having a look at response A, did you identify any of the characteristics below? So you could maybe just jot down in your delegate booklet any of these that you actually saw. So did you see in response A evidence or detail to support the statement or to oppose the statement? So obviously a balanced argument is something we'd be looking for on these types of questions. Did you see evidence of explanation and description? Did you see some reference to the 2 bullet points to support the answer? Did you see at least one additional area of knowledge and understanding of your own to support or oppose the proposition? So remember, they need to use their own knowledge as well. And did you see a judgment supported by evidence? So in other words, this is a checklist that it'd be really, I think, helpful for candidates to see before attempting a 16-mark question. Because if they do all of this and they do it well, it is likely that they will be accessing the top level. Okay, so that's what I'd like you to do there. What I will do though is I'll just try and bring up the first exemplar. So in the pack, just scroll down, I think it was page 30. Right. Okay. I'm just checking. So in the delegate pack, it's not actually page 30. So it is, apologies for this. So the first exemplar is, well, on page 25, we've got a copy of the mark scheme. So page 25 is the mark scheme. On page 26 and 27, we've got the first example. And then on page 28, we've got the second example. Okay, so I will give you about 7 minutes, I think, just so we're keeping ourselves on track. Can you have a look at these two exemplars in your pack? And if you're working with somebody, that's great. You could read through this together and just discuss in terms of that checklist in your delegate booklet, can you find the evidence in the response of those different features? Okay, I'll keep example of response A on screen just for a few minutes and I'll scroll through it in case any delegates cannot access their exemplars right now. But just have a read through and thinking about, is there evidence to support or oppose the statement? Evidence of explanation and description. Have they mentioned anything to do with the two bullet points that was already given? Is there anything additional that is included in the answer? And is there a judgment to support their own thoughts? A judgment supported by evidence. Okay. Okay, so hopefully if I transferred example A, it does get, the text gets a little bit small there towards the end, doesn't it? Okay, exemplar B is a bit shorter, so I'll just put this on screen now. Okay, right. So I think it's clear that obviously exemplar A is much better than exemplar B. Exemplar A, so this was given, this was a level 3. So just to remind ourselves of the question, so reforming agriculture was Ayub Khan's greatest success. Discuss how far you agree with this statement. And then we had a couple of bullet points there. So this response, it covered a range of different ideas here. There was some good description about what happened, and this was accompanied by some really useful explanation about why it had an impact. There is also evidence throughout of some reflection, some evaluation about, okay, so what might have been the strength or the weakness of something as well. And another good point about this response is that the candidate has actually brought in some of their own knowledge and understanding. It does get a bit tricky to read towards the end, but right at the end, there is a conclusion. Now, this isn't the only time in the answer the candidate has done some reflection. There is points during the course of the response as well, where the candidate is offering some evaluation. So the examiner comment, they said that this was a very good response. It got 15 out of 16 marks. And to be honest, it isn't really that far off 16 marks. It's probably about as good as you're going to see, to be honest. The candidate demonstrates a full understanding of the policies. There's consistent and sustained links to the focus of the question. It's a balanced answer as well. Now, in terms of balance, it doesn't need to be literally 50-50 in terms of agree and disagree. You just need to make sure that the candidates have looked at both sides of the argument. And it could be that one side is more weighted than the other. That is fine. They can still get full marks for that. So, balanced supportive answer, considering the relative merits of a number of different policies. So this is towards the top of level 4. This was given 15 marks. The second response, obviously weaker. This is more of a description of what happened. There's less in the way of explanation and evaluation in this response. So this candidate has talked through a few different strategies, but it is quite descriptive. So this is in level 2 because there is some valid content here, some decent knowledge and understanding, but with partial analysis. So in terms of the explanation, it is very weak. The candidate hasn't really developed those at all. So as the examiner comment says, the candidate did not develop the points made, but tended to list the information and make unsupported assertions. So it is very much a description of they did this, then they did that, then they did that. And whilst all of that is fine, it doesn't have that explanation you would expect for the top end of level 2 and into level 3. Okay, so just something to be aware of. So when using this checklist, one thing that we sometimes see is that candidates just use those 2 bullet points, and they use their 2 bullet points as the structure for their answer. Now, to a certain extent, that is fine, but it is important that they do include at least one additional area of knowledge and understanding. If a candidate only considers 2 suggested factors, it does limit the marks available significantly. Candidates cannot achieve maximum marks in any level without introducing appropriate factors from their own knowledge. And they can't get into level 4 at all without considering fully factors that they've introduced into the answer. So this is really important. And unfortunately, we do see quite a few candidates that perhaps are quite able candidates, but they do not go beyond the 2 bullet points in so just a warning about that. But hopefully, what we've seen from looking at these 2 different questions is that these exemplar responses can be really useful as a teaching tool, and using the mark scheme actually in your lessons, and hopefully making candidates, your students, familiar with how the mark scheme operates can be a really important way in developing their exam technique. Okay, so in your exemplar pack, you've obviously got lots of different examples there, good ones and weaker ones for a range of questions. And in today's session, we've only got time to look at a handful of those, but you've got a whole pack for paper 1 and a whole pack for paper 2 that you can download and use in your lessons. So hopefully these 2 activities has given you a bit of an idea of how you could use those. Okay, we're roughly halfway through today's session. I think we will take a 10-minute break now. So this will give me a chance to have a look in your chat to see if you've had any questions there, or give you a chance to post something in the chat if there was something from the first part that you wanted a bit more clarification on. We will be starting back in 10 minutes time, looking at paper 2, the question types and some exemplar responses from paper 2. So I will see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of today's session. And I popped a little reminder in the chat just to say that in this session, we're going to be looking at the exemplars from paper 2. So in your delegate pack, you've got one of these documents for paper 1 and one for paper 2. We're going to be looking at paper 2 now. And just like we had for paper 1, this booklet contains a lot of actual exemplar responses from candidates for a range of questions. And for each one, there'll be a kind of a strong response and a weaker response. So I know a few people were asking on Tuesday at the meeting there, well, what does a candidate need to do to get into level 3 and level 4? So hopefully this document gives some indication of that, because each response has got a comment from an examiner about why it got the marks it got and what it would have needed to have done to got more marks. It also has in the booklet at the front just a reminder of the assessment objectives, and it also has for each question a copy of the mark scheme, some exemplar responses, and an examiner's comment. Okay, we will be using this booklet for the second half of today's session when we look at a couple of different questions. So just to begin with then, paper 2 is what we're looking at next. That's the landscape, people and economy of Pakistan. So it's essentially the physical and human geography of Pakistan. So in terms of course content, this is divided up into 2 parts. Well, this is divided into 3 parts. So if you look on screen now, just a reminder, part 1, paper 1 is the history and culture. We're now looking at part 2, the landscape, people and economy. And this paper, this section is divided up into 3 parts, 3 sections, all of which are compulsory. So all of this content needs to be covered in lessons, and candidates need to be ready to answer questions in the exam from any parts of this. So paper 2, the 3 sections, we have got the physical environment of Pakistan, the human environment, and challenges for Pakistan. And these are the different types of questions. So first of all, multiple choice questions with a resource. So this is something that is quite different to what you would see on paper one. These multiple choice questions will always have a resource attached to them. So here we've got a population pyramid, but it could just equally be a photograph, it could be a map, but it will be some resource. And candidates will be expected to use their skills to extract and interpret information from the resource. So this multiple choice question, we have got a population pyramid, and the question is identify the age range. So this is just basically reading off the correct part of the graph. And it's the intention that these resources are not just used with a multiple choice question, but these resources could be used to answer the later questions as well. So on the 1 mark answer questions, the command word might be name, state, or calculate. So for example, this question here is name the type of graph shown in figure 5. So obviously after the multiple choice question, the 1 mark short open response question, name the type of graph. So it is linked in. And then the next question is also linked in. The next type of question is a short answer, 1 mark plus 1 mark type question. The command word here could be name or state, but the example we've got here, this is a state question. So state 2 factors influencing the shape of the graph shown in figure 5. So again, these are all linked. So we could, for example, say that on this graph, we've got what appears to be a falling birth rate. It's got quite a wide base. So a candidate could perhaps give a reason why it's got a wide base, a reason for high birth rates, but they could also give a reason why the shape is showing a slightly falling birth rate between the 0 and 4 and 5 to 9 age groups. It's also relatively narrow at the top of this particular pyramid, particularly after 75 to 79. So they could give a reason perhaps why it might be narrow at the top. Okay, so looking at the mark scheme, so for 3A.1, the correct response was B, which, just remind ourselves, was 15 to 19, the age group with the largest population. In more recent examination series, the mark scheme will also say why A, C, and D are incorrect. So this just purely has the correct answer, but more recent mark schemes, you may notice, they do have an explanation in the mark scheme why the other 3 are incorrect. 3A.2, this was the name the graph, so either would be acceptable here, age sex pyramid or population pyramid, just 1 mark there. And 3A.3, 1 mark for each correct point, up to a maximum of 2 marks. So you'll notice that it's 2A01, but there's no requirement for this 2 mark question to develop their answer. It was state 2, so we need 2 separate reasons for 2 marks. So just writing low birth rate, low death rate, high birth rate, that would get 2 marks. So actually looking at what the birth and death rate is like at various points in the pyramid, that would get 2 marks. Or they could give a bit more of a reason why. So if they wrote high birth rate on the first line and put improving medical care for young children on the second line, that would be both fine for 2 marks. Then, as the difficulty ramps up during the exam paper, the next question will be an explain question worth 3 marks. So here, this question here, explain one physical factor that influences population distribution in Pakistan. So for this one, it's worth 3 marks, but they only have to come up with one physical factor. Now, these questions are actually some of the hardest questions to answer to pick up all marks, because what the candidate has to do here, they need to come up with a physical factor. So it could be to do with the relief of the land. It could be to do with proximity to tectonic hazards. It could be to do with the fertility of soil. It could be to do with maybe an extreme of weather, extreme climate. But then they need to develop it saying why that influences population distribution for the 2nd mark. And then they need to have a double development, which means that something like that for the 3rd mark. So looking at the mark scheme here, 1 mark for the initial point. So this is just a basic point with a bit of locational detail, and then 2 further marks for expansion. So for example, areas of lowland such as the Punjab. So lowland in the Punjab area, 1 mark. This can support extensive farmland. That will get the 2nd mark. Whereas upland areas, like the Himalayan foothills, tend to have lower population densities. So that's a double development. They've come up with a basic point, but then they've expanded upon that twice for 3 marks. The other example we've got in the mark scheme, areas with an extreme climate such as the Thar Desert, there's a low population density, 1 mark, due to the shortage of water, 2nd mark. Whereas areas that receive monsoon rainfall can support a high population density, 1 mark. So these explain 1 for 3 marks. It's been able to get that double development. There's 2 AO2 marks available here. This is the tricky one for the candidates, to develop it once, develop a basic point once, and then develop it again for the 2nd mark. Okay, I'm just working through the other types of questions on paper 2. So another one is the 4 mark command word suggest type questions. So this again will be attached to a particular resource, for example, an infographic like we've got on screen now. And the question here is suggest 2 strategies that the Pakistan government might use to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Now, obviously, candidates might have a good understanding of possible ways in which the government is trying to adapt and respond to the impacts of climate change. But just writing about that, that is just AO1 and AO2. It's using their own knowledge. Whereas in this question, we've clearly got a figure with some information on, and the command word is suggest. This will hopefully make candidates think that they need to actually apply what they know to the resource that they have in front of them. So it's actually testing the different AO. You can see in the mark scheme here, just looking ahead, it's AO2 and AO3. So that AO3 is the ability to take a resource, interpret it, make sense of it, and then they're going to be using their AO2 knowledge and understanding to help them write a response. So, for example, in the response here, we've got information about glaciers retreating. We've got information about temperatures rising. The snow line is shifting, and so on. The question paper will be set out in a scaffolded manner like this. So it is 2 + 2, essentially. So suggest 2 strategies. They can't get 3 marks in one particular section. It is 2 + 2. And this is because of the AOs. The AOs are targeted 2 + 2. So, for example, building more dams than other river defences will help protect people from floods caused by increasing river discharge from the melting glaciers. So clearly, this, if a candidate wrote that, they would get 2 marks. And the AO3 is the evidence that they've actually used the resource. So the melting glaciers, that would convince the examiner that this candidate has looked at the resource and has suggested a way of overcoming that. Then we've got the 6-mark command word explain type questions. So these are similar. These work in a similar way as the 6-mark explain ones from paper 1, with the levels mark scheme, with the 3 levels in it. So the question we've got here is explain the challenges of rapid population growth for people living in a named megacity in Pakistan. There'll always be a line there for named megacity. That's not going to get them any marks if they wrote down a named megacity. That's just really there to help the candidate focus on a particular location. But also when the examiner is reading the response, they will make a judgment whether they have been specific about that named megacity. So in the mark scheme, we have got some indicative content, some ideas what we might be expecting. Maybe we've got the challenges in terms of services, impacts on health and education, and so on. We've got maybe the impact on housing. We've got the idea of informal settlements appearing often around the edges of cities and the challenges associated with these. We've got maybe links to the demand for transport as well. So we've got some generic ideas, but obviously, depending on which named megacity the candidate has wrote on their answer paper, that will hopefully gear the question towards moving up the levels. If they just wrote a very generic response about a city, and it could be any city, it is unlikely to get outside level 1. So a level 1 answer is the same generic mark scheme we use on paper 1. So level 1 is just some basic points, lack of explanation. Whereas in level 2, we've got that partial explanation. So we've got some development. And by using some place-specific information of a named megacity, that will help a response get into level 2, no doubt. And then level 3, this is just the more detailed explanation. We've got greater breadth and depth within the answer. Okay, and then the next type of question is the 8-mark evaluate, or I should say assess type questions. So evaluate, I mean, the difference really is an evaluate question is where you're just weighing up maybe how successful something has been. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Has something been successful or not? And so on. So evaluate is very much weighing up, using the scales, weighing up overall what has it been in terms of its success or the advantages, etc. Assess is slightly different. So an assess question is where you'll be breaking something down and looking at the individual parts within the question and almost doing a mini evaluation for each one. It doesn't need a final conclusion assess, but often you will see candidates writing one. That is absolutely fine. But for an assess question, it's just breaking down the factors and looking at those in a bit of detail. So, for example, the one we've got on screen, assess the success of strategies to support rural communities in Pakistan. In this response, one would be expecting the candidate to write about 2 or 3 strategies. Is plural strategies, so just writing about one wouldn't get full marks. But if you try to write about 4, it's only worth 8 marks. So there's a good chance if you did 4 in great depth, you could get 8 marks, but you could also spend too long on the question. You know, a candidate could quite easily get full marks on 2 or 3 strategies if they've done them in sufficient depth. So for each strategy, you would be expecting the candidate to write something about, well, what is it? What is it designed to do? And then to what extent has it helped rural communities? So a little bit of a evaluation there, and then that would be repeated for the other strategies. So this is the generic mark scheme for assess and evaluate questions. They use the same mark scheme, even though it's a different command word. And you'll see, just looking through the levels, it refers to unbalanced and incomplete arguments becoming balanced. So when you're assessing or evaluating, just like I said earlier, it doesn't need to be perfectly balanced in terms of the same amount of writing for pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, but the candidate does need to consider both sides of the argument. And sometimes it might be a bit one-sided, that is fine, but both sides need to be considered. Okay, so we've just run through the different types of questions that appear in paper 2, and that will be the same in every exam series. So every exam series will start off with a multiple choice question, and then you'll have the low tariff 1 mark, 2 mark, 3 mark questions. Then there'll be the explain questions, and then there'll be the 8 mark question. So for the next part of the session, we're going to be having a look in the exemplar responses pack. And it's just really to give you time to have a look at some exemplars in the booklet and make a few notes of your thoughts in the delegate pack. So to begin with, and there's a few things we're going to be moving on to now. It's activity 4 in the delegate booklet. So I will just bring that up on screen. We're not going to do activity 3 today. So activity 4, excuse me. So this is question 2D in the exemplar booklet. So what I'd like you to do is just read through the question and the mark scheme and try and read through by marking response A without reading the commentary. How many marks would you have given it? Why would you give it that mark? And then have a look at the comments box from the examiner and how does your marking compare to what they put? So this is going to be the first task I'm going to give you. So in the exemplar pack, I'll just show you which one it is. 2D, here we go. There we go. So 2D. So this is on page 21. The question is study figure 4, which gives information about Pakistan's railways and suggest reasons for the reduction in passenger traffic. And number 2, the number of freight wagons in the years 2000 to 2016. So that is where you need to be in your pack. So have a look through the mark scheme. Have a look through response A without looking at the commentary. How many marks would you have given it out of 4? And then have a look at the comments box and just see how you compare. Whilst you're doing that, I'll just share this to show you the page we should be on. Ooh. Okay, so this is the page we're on. So it's page 21 in the pack. I'll just give you a few minutes just to have a look through that. If you've got any questions, though, about this particular question, the task, do pop it in the chat so I can pick those up at the end of today's session, and then I'll get back to you before the end of the call. Okay, just give you a few minutes to do that. Activity 4 in your booklet. Okay, right. So if we can just move us on. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that. I'm just going to pause for a second and have a look to see if any delegates had any comments in the chat before we move on to the next bit. Okay, right. Yes, so I'll just have a look through the chat before we move on. So I can see we've got a few questions. So what does the command word evaluate demand? So the command word evaluate, I think I mentioned this, but I'll go through that again. So evaluate is where it will be like two sides of an argument to reflect upon. So evaluate, you're looking at one side, it could be the strengths of something, then looking at the other side, which could be the disadvantages of something, the weaknesses, and then making a final conclusion. So evaluate has to have a final conclusion. Okay. My student wrote 6 points and got 6 marks. So what is the demand of question? Assume points of elaboration, then second point is elaboration, third point. Yes, so if this is regarding something, I'm not sure if this is for a 6 mark explain question or an evaluate or assess question of 6 mark explain. Thank you. Yeah. So on a 6 mark explain, remember this isn't point marked, so it's not a case of just getting a tick every time they come up with a point and a development. So it's not like a explain 3 things for 6 marks. It will be left open. So getting into level 3, they don't need to do 6 different points and develop that. They could well have got 6 marks before they'd actually finished writing their answer. So it's about the depth. So if they did 3 points, 2 or 3 points in really good depth, that could get 6 marks. Or if they just wrote five points, so a bigger range with slightly less depth, that probably wouldn't get them the full marks. If they wrote a range of lots of ideas but still not getting the depth, it's unlikely that will get into level 3. Level 3, it is having that thorough understanding. So out of those 6 points for 6 marks, I would suspect that maybe a couple of those were not even needed. It was the elaboration, the development on the early points that would have got them the mark. Okay. Yes, apologies, I wasn't sharing the screen earlier, but hopefully that was sorted now. In example question 2D, the candidate hasn't developed the second point. Yeah, we can have a look at that one before we move on. In example answer 2, yeah. Okay, so I'll just take a look at that one before we move on. So I'll go back to sharing the screen. Yeah, so just quickly before we move on. So on the ones you were looking at there, exemplar response A, the first one, this was given 4 marks. Okay, this got 4 marks. We had 2 developed points. I think that was quite a straightforward one to hopefully mark. And in the second one, this was given 3 marks. and I think this was 2+1. Okay, so I think as Amanda mentioned, it didn't develop the second bit. Okay, so there's 2 marks for the first section, 1 mark for the second section. Right, okay, I'm going to move us on, but I will be going back to the chat and having a look later on at any further questions or comments. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at another question. This is going to be activity 5 in your delegate booklet. So it's going to be a similar task, but instead of looking at 2D, we're going to look at 2E in the booklet today. So I just stop sharing and I'll come out. I'll try and open the delegate booklet again. There we go. So 2E, this is just moving on to the next page. So it's page 24 in your exemplar pack. Here, this is a 6-mark explain the impact of globalization on Pakistan. So we've got the detailed content on screen, along with the generic mark scheme for a 6-mark explain question. And in your delegate booklet, there are 3 questions that you need to do. The first one is read response B, so the second response, without reading the commentary. So if you just skip over A, A was a really good answer, clearly 6 marks. B, not as good, but I won't say any more than that. It's just on screen now, the whole response. So have a read through that on screen. How many marks would you give that out of 6? What level would it be? How many marks? Then have a look through and see how many marks the examiner gave it. And how close were you? Were you in agreement, or were you a bit harsh, or were you a bit lenient? It's not a level 3 response. So what advice would you give a candidate in your class who'd written this? What advice would you give them that they could improve this and get into level 3? So what is it missing for level 3? Okay, I'll just give you a few minutes just to have a read through this one and do those questions in your delegate pack. Okay, right. So overall, this was given 4 marks. So this was top of level 2, 4 marks. The examiner also said that this response was more typical of those seen when this was sat as a live exam in 2019. There are some valid comments and explanations about globalization linked to the inflation in Pakistan, and a single descriptive comment about positive aspects of globalization. So there's some decent content here, but the advice to this candidate to get them to level 3 would be a greater depth and range of explanation is needed, and a more substantiated focus on Pakistan is needed for level 3. Okay, so I'm just going to move us on to your final activity in the pack today, and this is question 2F. So question 2F, this is just on the next page. This is an 8-mark question. So the question for 2F is, evaluate the impact of regional disparities on the economic development of Pakistan. So just really focus on the command word evaluate. So remember, this is looking at 2 sides of the argument. So in other words, the idea that actually it's maybe not had a very big impact. On the other side, thinking, well, actually, it has had a big impact. So it is weighing it up. So the command word evaluate is weighing it up. Has the impact been significant or not really that significant at all? So for this one again, I would like you to have a look at the second response. So just scrolling through. So you've got the mark scheme and the generic evaluate mark scheme in the pack. Response A, this was given 5 out of 8. And you can go back and have a look at that one later. And here's response B. Okay, so I'm afraid it's a little bit blurry on my screen. Hopefully it might be a bit clearer in your pack. I'll just leave that on screen for a few minutes, give you a chance to have a read through, and then same again, what level would you put this in and what mark would you give it? What are your reasons for that? So if you've given feedback to the candidate, what have they done well? What haven't they done, maybe for full marks if you didn't think it was worth full marks? And then have a look at the examiner and see how that compares. Okay, just give you a few minutes to have a look through that. Okay, right. So this was actually given full marks, this response. The examiner said this answer makes very clear references to Pakistan and to named locations at different levels of development to illustrate the regional disparities that exist. The candidate provides a number of balanced and well-developed arguments, such as the lack of investment in the coal-producing areas of Tar, to reach judgments about the economic implications of regional imbalances and to make an overall conclusion that relates back to the points previously made. So full marks there for that particular question. So well done if you agreed with that. Okay, so just moving us back. So that covers the main part of today's session. And hopefully, by having a look at some of the different question types and the mark schemes in the exemplar pack, it's maybe given you a few ideas about the different types of questions that will be coming up in the next exam, the format the exam takes, and also in terms of what is expected for different levels from a response within the mark scheme. And obviously you've got the packs to take away with you, and you can use this in your planning and teaching. But also Pearson offers a wide range of support for teachers who are new to delivering this qualification. I went through some of these on Tuesday. So the majority of these are available on the website. So if you just do a search for Pearson, Edexcel, GCSE Pakistan Studies, it will take you to the majority of these documents. In fact, I will just see if I can find this for you now, and I will show you where they are. So it's Pearson, GCSE Pakistan Studies. So it's the first link that you come to. Just start sharing my screen again now. Okay, so so the first link, if you type in Pearson GCSE Pakistan Studies, the first link is it says 2017, and this is because it was first taught in 2017. This is when a centre started to teach it for their first assessment in 2019. I went through this in quite a bit of detail in Tuesday's session, but if just in case you weren't here on Tuesday, on the home page for the subject, you can download the specification. Under specification and sample assessments, you can also find the specification, and the sample assessments is a set of exam papers that were written before the first exam, designed to give centres an idea of what the exam would actually look like. You've also got exam materials. So under exam materials, you've got every single exam series here. So you could just click on one of those, and for each paper, you can download the question paper, the mark scheme, and the examiner report. In 2024, the summer just gone, this is still padlocked because some centres, some schools like to use these for mock exams. If you need access to these, speak to your exams officer in school. And then finally, under teacher and learning materials, here you can see resources such as the exemplar exam material. So we've got the exemplars which we've been looking at today. You've got the Getting Started guide, which was written that can accompany today's course. And this is particularly useful for having some links and information about resources that you can use when delivering the course. So when deciding how you're going to teach it, this provides details of resources, because there isn't just one standalone textbook for the course. We've got some PowerPoints from past training materials. There's an editable scheme of work for both papers. So this is in a Word document, and it shows you how the course can be covered over 2 years. breaking down the different parts of the specification into lessons. And these are just some generic documents mapping the skills covered by the qualification. So lots of material on the website, which is available for you. In addition to that, Pearson do offer a range of other services. Now, I'm not going to spend too long talking about these because I did, as I say, go into quite a bit of depth on Tuesday. And I know we've got some people who are here for that course. But just to say that Pearson offers a service called Results Plus. So this analyzes exam performance for your students in your school, looking at how they did across the exam paper, looking at areas which they did particularly well on or not so well on. So you can use this to inform your planning in the future. It also gives information about how students perform nationally on different questions, and also similar schools to yourselves, how they performed. So this can be a really useful tool in looking at areas where students are performing well, but also where they're not performing as well, which then obviously can inform your teaching for future students. You can also use Results Plus for mock exams as well. It's not just a post-results tool, so you can use Results Plus when you've done a mock exam with your students. You can input the information into Results Plus, and it will perform, and it will carry out some analysis. And just this, on the image on the right, you can just about make out what this can look like. So you can have graphs to show performance of students, but also question by question, it can be color-coded. So red means they've not performed as well as other students on that question. Amber is broadly in line, and green means they've actually performed in line or better. So these reports that you can get from Results Plus are really useful in helping you identify how well the performance was across the students that have just sat the exam, but also thinking ahead to how you could change the way you're doing certain bits of the course for future students. Also developing on the website is Exam Wizard, which is a tool for you to put together a customized mock exam paper based upon past real exam papers. And also the access to scripts facility, which is free. So after an exam series, with the student's consent, you can actually go in and have a look at their exam papers that they did in the summer. You can download them as a PDF, and then that can be used either as a teaching tool, or if you were thinking of a review of marking, if you were querying the grade that the candidate was awarded, by accessing their script in the first place can help inform that decision whether you want to go ahead with that. And finally, for IGCSE Pakistan Studies, you have got your own subject advisor. So his name is John Walton. His contact details are on screen now, and he's a subject advisor for geography and Pakistan Studies. So if you've got any questions regarding the content, the delivery, or the assessment of the course, do contact John, and he's really good. He will get back to you with some practical advice. So often teachers querying bits of the specification, not knowing exactly how much depth they might need to go into on one particular aspect. If you've got any questions like that, John will be able to help you. And there are also some updates there. There's links on screen now. You can stay up to date with developments in terms of Pakistan Studies. For example, one thing you might have seen on the website was the on-screen testing that Pearson is introducing for several subjects next year. That will keep, if and when that is happening for Pakistan Studies, it will give you that information there. So stay up to date by signing up for one of John's monthly newsletters or updates. Okay, right. So that brings us to nearly the end of today's course. Excuse me, too much talking from me. If you've got any questions, please can you put those in the chat box? Okay, apologies for that. So yes, if you've got any questions, I will be staying on the call until I've been through all the questions on the chat and also until everyone has left. If you don't have any further questions, if you're happy with that today, that is absolutely fine for you to leave now. And it just leaves me to say thank you on behalf of Pearson for attending today's course. I hope you have found it useful, and good luck with the delivery of this course, and I hope to see you again soon. Okay, bye for now.